Good morning, everybody. Can you all hear me? All right. Well, welcome to Stir Trek. I hope you're all awake this morning. Hope some of you didn't have to get up at a ridiculous hour to get here. I drove 10 minutes to get here, so you can all be jealous of me. Anyways, my name is John Kruger. I'm an independent consultant here in Columbus. I do anything from software development to leading teams to helping teams adopt agile practices. And today we're going to talk about iteration management. So these are some invaluable tips that I've learned over the years of being a developer and being a team lead. So we're going to talk about 10 tips that hopefully you can take back and you can start implementing tomorrow on your job. Actually, Monday. So what is iteration management? So I define it as the art of managing, estimating, planning, and execution of a software development project over a short period of time, whether you do this individually or in a team environment. So it's not the same as project management. So I think project management, I think of somebody managing a project over like a long period of time, like maybe 6 months. It may be managing across multiple different teams with a lot of coordination and all that. Whereas iteration management is like, we have this short amount of time. How are we going to deliver in 2 weeks? And how are we going to get our things done? And how are we going to be efficient at that? So it's a much smaller scale. But I think it's just as important. So we want to identify team problems as soon as possible and find a way to fix them. So you want to get really good at spotting the developer that is stuck. And this happens all the time. So I don't know why developers are like this, but they are. So they don't want to admit that they are stuck. So they'll get stuck and they think, I'm smart enough, I should be able to work my way out of this. Or they think, everybody else on my team is busy, I don't want to bother them by asking them a question or all that. When a lot of times, if someone talked to them, they could solve their problem in 10 minutes if they just had a little bit of help. So you want to find those people, whether they're blocked because they just can't figure something out or because they are not getting the requirements they need from the business. Someone needs to find these people. We want to help the team become as efficient as possible. So developers, testers, they like to be very heads down. I like to pull a ticket. I like to sit here. I put my headphones on. I write code. I don't want any distractions. I want to focus. Well, the downside of that is then you sometimes miss the big picture of what's going on in the team. So if you have someone that his job is to see the big picture, that allows the other people on the team to focus. We want to help with planning and estimating. So handling changes that come in from the business during the iteration or just figuring out what we're going to do in the next 2 weeks and help the team estimate and get better at estimating and sort of be a coach as well. So as I'm going to show you today, and as you probably all know, estimating is very difficult. So we want to find ways to get better. And there's always some communication with management involved in this, just like there is in project management. And maybe not as much, but there tends to be some overlap. So I found that a lot of times when I'm doing iteration management, I am, if it's a smaller project, I kind of am the project manager as well. So we need to understand what is important to management and be able to talk to them. Now, this isn't necessarily a full-time job. In all the cases I've done it, it's been somebody on the team. It could be a developer, it could be a BA, it could be a tester. I've seen it work all different ways. It could be a combination of people. But it needs to be somebody who is invested in the team. That's when I think it works best. Someone that is also responsible for delivery in some aspect. And there's other ways to do it. And there's other places that will have people that are dedicated iteration managers, and they're sort of managing the iterations for like 3 different teams. I've never done it that way, but I'm not going to say that couldn't work. So we all know that management wants things done quickly, right? Well, they also want things done predictably. So they don't want surprises. So if you come to them and say, I got this project and it's going to take, you think it's going to take 4 to 6 months. Well, they probably don't want you to come and say 4 months. They might like that up front. But then when you get to month 4 and you're 2 months behind, and now they got to go back to their boss and say that the estimate was wrong, this puts them in a really tough spot. They're not going to like that. If you tell them up front it's going to be 6 months, well, they're probably not going. They might not like that up front, but now you can have a conversation early enough and explain, okay, this is why I think it's going to take 6 months. And now if they go tell their boss 6 months, they're probably not going to have to go back and ask for more time. If anything, maybe they'll be done early. So we want to be able to deliver consistently, because if we're all over the map, then your manager has no idea if you're going to actually be able to deliver on time. And if you can't deliver on time, that's a bad reflection on them because that's supposed to be their job to make sure that things get delivered on time. So we want to try and solve our manager's problems. If we can do that, then we're going to be in good shape. So what is an iteration? How many of you work on some kind of agile project? Oh man, if I would have asked that 10 years ago, there'd have been like 2 hands. That's great. Okay, so a lot of you probably know what an iteration is. So it's some set amount of time in which we're going to go through a series of activities. We're going to do some planning, we're going to do some development, we're going to do some testing, and we're going to either release it to production or we're going to call something done, say that it's all the way tested, and maybe do some UAT. So how long, this is up to you. So I like 2-week iterations. Some people do a week, some people do 3 weeks, some people do 4 weeks. It's just whatever works for you. I find that the 2-week cadence, our business partners like it. It's a reasonable amount of involvement for them to, every 2 weeks I got to have this meeting. Like they can handle that. Some people don't have iterations. They just have a continuous flow of work. So if anybody's doing the Kanban approach, it's just, hey, I'm just pulling the next ticket out of the backlog and we're going to keep things flowing through. So a lot of these concepts will still work in that environment, but you're doing it, you're not doing it on these predefined chunks. So what if I'm not on an Agile project? Well, this isn't really a talk about Agile. You don't have to be in an Agile environment to do the things that we're going to talk about. I find that it really helps because a lot of the Agile principles really encourage fast feedback and they really help you to write quality code and do good planning. But really, we're just trying to find problems as fast as we can to address them. Agile is really good at that. If you're not doing Agile, you can still do this kind of stuff. But you may have some hurdles to overcome. So what if you're not a team lead? How many of you are a team lead? Okay, so not even half of you. Well, that's okay. So certainly if you have a team lead, you have more sway over how the team works. But if you're not a team lead, think of yourself as a team of one. So think about how can I get better at my own planning and my own estimating and my own method of writing code or doing whatever it is that you do. Okay, so first tip is having some kind of a board. So Agile people are probably used to this, or I'm sure by this point we've all heard about Agile card walls and that sort of thing. So you have all these columns that show the status of work items, and you move work items across the board. We also have online tools that will do this. So I'm guessing that everybody that has a physical board also has some kind of online tool that they use to track their work items, and that's where you put all the requirements and that sort of thing. How many of you have a board like this? How many of you just track your work items in an online tool and don't have a board? Okay. So I'm a fan of boards. Right now my team is not using a board. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you have to use a board, but I'll tell you what's good about it. So you can set this board up to make things very obvious when things are wrong. So we have all these different columns. I don't know if you can read it. The big column in the middle is ready for dev. It's okay to have a lot of stuff ready for dev. When we get farther over, like in testing, ready for testing, those columns aren't so big. So we have a limitation here put in place in that if I can't find room to put a ticket in the ready for testing column, or if tickets are overlapping, I may have a problem. So for example, let's say that you had this board. This is the situation I just said. So we're starting to pile up tickets in the testing column. So if you're iteration manager, you can say, hey, look, I see that we're either developing things faster than we can test them, or maybe we're having a lot of bugs, or maybe things are getting stuck. So this is where you go and say, hey, what's the problem here? And what can we do to fix it? Maybe we have a quality problem that we need to write better code. Maybe we need to have a BA or a developer help test to help get the testers caught up. So here, testing's good. We got this big pile of stuff that's blocked in development. Well, why is it blocked? Somebody needs to go ask this question and then try to go get the answers to figure out why everything is getting blocked. Is it they don't have good enough requirements? Is it they're waiting for the infrastructure team to get them a database server? What's going on here? Here, development and testing look great, but hey, I only got one thing left in the backlog. So, by the end of the day, some of my developers may have finished their tickets, and now they may be out of work to do. So we don't want that, because now developers are sitting around with nothing to do. And this is a nice clean board. Everything is evenly distributed. We don't have anything blocked. There's nothing piled up. So if you're using an online tool, again, you can see all this stuff, but it might be harder to see it, to visually just look at something and see it. So when I started on my current project, and this was 4 years ago, this was my board that I walked into. So, ready for testing? Right here in the middle. It's so stacked up that people were printing out lists of bugs in Excel and just putting the printouts up there. There was a serious problem here. Testers were 3 weeks behind the development in this project. So we had a big 5-week push just to get everybody caught up and to fix all the bugs. And that meant developers were testing too. So as iteration manager, this is stuff that so we need someone to be looking for this kind of stuff so that it can get resolved as soon as we can find it. So managing the iteration. So again, we want our team members to be able to be heads down, doing their job as efficiently as they can, and then you are the unblocker. So you need to be able to keep things flowing, find the people that are stuck, find what they're blocked on, find bottlenecks in the process. Saying, oh, hey, QA people are spending forever setting up this manual test data, but I got a developer here that could write a SQL script in 10 minutes to generate all this test data for them. Why don't we go do that? It's also enforcing the definition of done. So my definition of done is working tested features. So things have been coded and tested. Now, it doesn't mean they've gone to production, because you may be working on a 6-month project where you're not going to go to production until the end. But when you call something done, it better be pretty much ready. You're done testing it, you're done developing it, everything is good to go other than you just haven't pushed the button to make it go to production. So at the end of the iteration, let's say you're doing iterations. So like I said, we do 2-week iterations. We branch the code on Friday, and we release it to production on Tuesday. So on Wednesday, usually we have a conversation, and we look at how much work testing has left to do, and we say, okay, the testers can't take any more stuff for this iteration.
I need to interrupt you just momentarily. Yeah. I need to make an announcement.
Okay, we have an announcement.
If you are parked at Roosters, you may need to go move your car because you may be towed. Just needed to let everybody know.
What if I'm parked at Roosters?
Run.
I am parked at Roosters.
Okay. Well, it's a good thing we did this then, isn't it? We'll pick up in a few. I don't know how much time you have to move that.
Oh, man, really?
Yeah, that was what he just came in to tell me. I was told to interrupt the speaker to make that announcement, so.
Oh, man. Oh, I don't have a lot of time. You see how fast I can run? Does do you have any trustworthy volunteers?
Key, I could move your car for you. Where are you parked?
Oh, man. I was parking there. I'm like, should I do this? But I did.
I'll don't mind.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a red Ford Fusion.
Sure.
And it's parked sort of towards the back.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll move.
Thank you, sir. Save the day. Yeah. I just got scammed out of my car. I'm an idiot. You better come back and tell me where you parked it. He parked it right in front of the front door in the handicap spot. Now I got a $250 ticket. Oh, where was I? Oh, man. Oh, I got to move on. All right, so estimating. So we love to say that, estimates are always wrong. Well, this is kind of a cop-out. I think we need to be done with saying this because we say, estimates are always wrong. And we're saying that because we don't really think that we can do a good enough job of estimating, or we don't want to get better at estimating. And well, hey, estimating is really hard. I admit it. But over time, we should be able to get better and better at it. So we all know that estimates are going to be interpreted as commitments by management, and this shouldn't surprise us anymore because it keeps happening. And when they say they ask for an estimate, you should just translate in your head to say, okay, we need a commitment of some kind. So how can we get better at estimating? Well, there's a lot of practical tips, like break things into smaller tickets. So ideally, we don't like our tickets to be more than 2 days of development. Sometimes they're more than that. There's no hard and fast rule. But when it's smaller, it's much easier to understand it. If it's a big ticket, it's like, oh, well, I got to do this, 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 and this. And then there's always like a couple things that like you don't think of. But when you break it, and like then you tend to be in these longer meetings where it's mind-numbing, and you're just like, oh man, I can't think about this anymore. I don't know, 3 weeks. Like that's not a good way to be accurate. It's much easier when you're debating, well, is this 4 hours or 8 hours? Like you can talk through that and figure that out. The people doing the work ideally should be the people doing the estimates, and estimate your testing and your analysis as well. So a lot of people don't estimate analysis, but then BAs just get sucked into this world where they get churned up because there's no estimate of how long this stuff's going to take. So I want to know up front, if an analysis is going to take a long time, I want to put some other people on it to help. So there's different estimations out there, or estimation methods. So we can measure in time, like hours or days. We can measure in things called story points. We can count tickets, or we can just not estimate. So a lot of people estimate in time, and I think that's because it just makes sense in your head, and people are used to doing it. So this works really well if you're on an application where you know the application well, you know the business, you know the subject matter, because at that point, like if I say something takes 4 hours, I have a pretty good idea that it's going to take 4 hours. And again, you really need to have the people doing the work, doing the estimating, because I might say something's 4 hours, but the guy next to me may not know as much as me about this part of the system. It might take him 2 days. Story points it's a relative estimate. So you're estimating tickets relative to how hard they are compared to other features. So how you do this is you take certain features that are different sizes and you assign a point value. So you say, okay, this feature here is worth 1 point, and this one is worth 2 points, and this one is 4 points. And then you take all the other ones and you kind of slide them in, like you're ordering them from easiest to hardest, and you're sort of slotting them, and they're going to get assigned a point value this way. So this works better if you don't know the application or the business or the subject matter well. In this case, it's really hard to estimate the actual size because there's just so much you don't know. But it's not that hard to figure out if one thing is harder than another thing. This also helps because, again, I might have a 1 point ticket that I can do in 4 hours, and another guy has the 1 point ticket takes him twice as long, and his 2 point tickets take twice as long. Well, that relative estimate is still accurate for all of us. Doesn't matter how long it takes everybody to do it. This works best if, let's say that you're working for a consulting company and you're going in to do a project at some client, and you don't know anything about it. Your consulting company is doing the whole thing. You don't have any internal developers in your team, and you got to try to come up with an estimate. This is where it's much easier to do the relative estimation, and over time you're going to figure out what these story points means in terms of hours. I don't think that's bad. Ultimately, the whole point of estimating is so we can tell management how long it's going to take. They don't care that this project is 400 story points. They want to know that it's 2 months. So some people just like to count tickets. So they say, estimates are kind of a waste of time. If we can break our tickets down into about the same size, then we can just count how many tickets we get done each iteration, and all the variance will just kind of average itself out. Or maybe you just do like t-shirt sizes, like small, medium, large, and you count those. So that works too. This whole hashtag no estimates thing is this, movement of saying that estimates are a waste of time. Let's just do the most important work now, and that we'll be able to get things done faster. So I suppose there's situations where that works, otherwise people wouldn't be talking about it. But in most of the situations I've worked, you can't get away with that because management needs to know how long things are going to take, not just because they want to hound you about it, but because they might want you to do a project that if it takes 3 months, but if you say it's a year, they're going to be like, that's harder than I thought, let's not do that now. If you are also just working tickets like in a production support queue where you don't know what you're going to work on the next 2 weeks, stuff's just going to come flowing into you, then this kind of thing works great because your job is there's not as much planning involved. You're just getting things done. So how many of you ever played this game of how many are in the jar? I'm terrible at this. I can never get it right. So what if I gave you some more information though? Oh, suddenly this becomes a lot easier. If I got more and more jars, I'm going to probably get this thing pretty close to being right. So the best thing you can do for estimation is to learn from your estimations. The more data you can gather and the more you can learn over time about the project you're working on, you're going to get much more accurate at this stuff. Which leads us into data analysis, which is our next thing. Most developers, if there's one thing that they hate, it's entering their time in their time tracking system. This takes like 2 minutes of your time every week. Developers cannot stand doing this. I've seen developers just refuse to do it because there was something goofy about it, like, oh, I have to enter into these 2 different time trackers. I don't get it. I've had to enter into 3 time trackers. Whatever. It doesn't take a long time. But I like to collect all the data that I can. So let me give you some examples. So I was on a project. Where I was working at a consulting company. We bid on the first phase. We got it. We're going to go do the first phase of work, and then after that, we're going to go bid on the second phase of the work and do that. So we estimated all the work for the first phase, and we tracked all the actual hours we spent on every ticket. And you may think this sounds mind-numbing, but it really was not that bad. And then we realized over the next couple months that we were underestimating everything by 20%. When we were going to bid on the next part of the project, if we underestimated that by 20%, we're either going to lose money on the deal or people are going to work a ton of hours. So we really got saved because we were actually tracking that data. So we got to get better at estimating and planning. And how do you know if you're estimating correctly? So I like to track lots of things, but this depends on things being relatively consistent. So like your team members not changing, everybody's fully allocated to the project. Smaller teams, it's much easier to plan for 4 people than it is for 14 people. And you have to have accounting for all the hours that people are spending. And you have to have consistent hours. So if you have some people that just work 60-hour weeks for fun and put 40 on their timesheet, it's hard to know what they're spending their time on. Or if you're putting your data in your time tracker and you say, oh yeah, I spent 20 hours this week on dev and 5 hours on analysis and 25 on just general, like I don't know what it was. Like how are you supposed to, what is that general time? How do you know what that is? So this can work at the personal level as well, so not just at the team level. So you want to track everything that you do. So here's a good example. Let's say that you're going into before your iteration, somebody asks you how much time do you have, what percentage of your time are you going to spend on development this iteration, 2-week iteration. So let's say that you think it's 60%, but really it's 50%. So what's the difference between 60 and 50%? Well, that's 8 hours. So that's a Saturday. Either that or you're behind and you're not going to get your stuff done. So just that what's a seemingly little variance really is a big deal. And you got to watch out for what I call invisible time. So this is time that just went somewhere, but you don't know where it went. So it didn't go to moving a ticket. It's just kind of, you don't know what you did when you look back at the week. So, we all have meetings and we all have these general activities that we have to do that don't involve moving tickets, and that's okay, but I want to record what I did. And it's really tempting to not record all your time that you spent doing development tasks. So if you try to diagnose a production support problem for an hour, create a ticket, put an hour on it. If someone from the business comes to you and say, hey, I need this ad hoc query written and it takes 2 hours, make a ticket for it. So this way you're tracking that, yes, I did spend that time on development. And this is a ticket that we didn't plan for, but it's a ticket that happened. But if you don't put that in your work item tracker, it's just invisible to everybody. It's invisible to your manager, your project manager, your iteration manager. It's invisible to everybody, including you. That is time you actually did spend developing. It's just not time you spent on plan development. But see, this is all important stuff. Another thing is watching what fills up your day. So if you say, I'm going to spend 50% of my time on development, and now your days are half filled up with meetings, if you allow more meetings to be scheduled, now you're not honoring the commitment that you made to your team to get 50% of the work done. So you might say, oh, well, it's kind of rude to block off my calendar. There might be an important meeting. But your team is important too. And like we all know that meetings can just flood in. And sometimes you can't say no to meetings. But I usually block off my calendar when my day is half full, just to protect my time. All right, capacity planning. This is where we figure out how much work we can commit to in an iteration and what we should work on. So if you do like a Scrum-based, iteration-based approach, you're going to do this at the beginning of the iteration or maybe right before the iteration. So ideally, your ticket's already estimated at this point. We like to have them all estimated before and have the business prioritize them. So when we walk in here, we're just trying to figure out how much time we have, and then we're going to take whatever tickets are the highest priority. Otherwise, you waste all this time trying to figure out what the highest priority is, and you don't have the answers, and you waste a lot of people's time. So this is where you say, okay, like, who's got time off coming up? Does anybody have any, like, all-day weird meetings? We talk about things like, what percentage of your time is everybody going to spend on development, analysis, testing, other stuff? If your team is working on multiple different projects and the work items are broken up by project, then break your estimates out by projects. I'm going to spend 30% on this project and 70% on this project. And you may want to break your team into smaller teams to do this exercise. Again, if you have 14 people, thank you so much. Find me afterwards so I can find my car. If you have 14 people on your team, it's easier to break it up into smaller teams that work on similar functionality. They can each do their own planning. So I like to start with a gut feel here of like how much work we can get done. And I'm going to adjust my gut feel based on data and experiences that I learn over time. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But that's where it gets really cool. All right, metrics are things that you track that you might share with others to communicate status. So here's the key. If you learn anything about metrics today, data has no value on its own. The value is in the interpretation of the data. I'm going to say it again. Data has no value on its own. The value is in the interpretation of the data. For example, velocity charts. Like, people like to post these charts that show their progress over time. So what can you conclude from this chart? Well, maybe you might say that the average velocity is 58. Or you might say, well, the last two iterations have been really good, so I think we can do better than 58. The correct answer is absolutely nothing. Because you don't know in the low points, well, maybe there were people on vacation, and the high points, you might have had a whole bunch of work carry over from the last iteration that just got all checked in and tested in this one iteration. There's so many variables here. But if you post this, everyone is going to interpret it. And they may interpret it different ways. Your teammates are going to interpret it. Management's going to interpret it. Other teams are going to interpret it. But there's no interpretation here, so there's no value here because it's just going to send the wrong message. So there's different kinds of metrics. There's internal metrics and external metrics. Internal metrics are things that I'm going to track to help me plan and estimate, but I'm not going to share them outside the team. For example, estimates versus actuals. We already talked about this. Points and hours that we planned for versus the points and hours that we actually completed in an iteration. So this is like estimates versus actual, but for the whole iteration, for the whole team. Points or hours that we completed in the iteration, so the velocity that we just showed. Cycle time. So cycle time is how long does it take me to get a ticket from point A to point B. So maybe this is from the point that the business says, I want this, to the point that it's in production. Or maybe you say from the point that we say it's ready for devs to the point that we're done with testing. You can measure all these different cycle times. The point is that we want the cycle time to get as small as we can get it. Because if it's all drawn out, it's taking longer to get business value into production. And usually it's drawn out because there's some kind of blocker in the way. Whether it's just something just inefficient or we're getting stuck all the time, various different things. So work that comes into the iteration after the iteration starts. So you plan for all this work, and then you get to the end, and you didn't get everything done that you wanted because all this stuff came in. Well, we should start to expect the unexpected stuff to happen. And you can count that. You can say, okay, how much do we typically comes in an iteration? And we can set aside a bucket of time for that unexpected stuff that we have to do. How much work gets pushed out of the iteration? If you do the thing I just said, where you allow time for the unexpected, you probably aren't going to have very much pushed out of the iteration. If you see that things are always getting pushed out of the iteration, then that means that your planned capacity is too high and you need to adjust it. Number of hours people are working over 40 hours. So if people are having to work lots of hours to meet the iteration commitment. Okay. I'm worried now.
Yeah, slight addendum to the parking situation. Also, Bed Bath & Beyond, if you're parked over in front of Bed Bath & Beyond, that is also a danger zone. You may need to move there as well. I'm also being told to encourage you to tweet at Cinemark to complain about the parking situation. We didn't know this was going to be a problem this morning, and we're very sorry.
The mall?
Yeah, the mall is the safe spot. That's kind of unfortunate. We're very...
So like right? No, okay. Yeah. So like, if Rave is here and Roosters is here, go like back here behind the Rave Theater. That's the mall parking lot. So you are free there.
If the cop didn't stop you, then that's probably okay.
You're lucky. You could sell that parking spot right now.
Yeah, you probably could. Yeah, we're very sorry about the parking situation. We got informed about this morning. We are not happy about it either. Probably right in front, but I don't know where their lot boundaries are.
Sorry, everybody.
Yes. We apologize.
Bummer. All right. The slides will be online if you miss anything. Since half of you are missing it now. All right, so I like to track what percentage of time we spend on analysis, development, and testing, and everything else. So if we estimate this up front, like how much time we think we're going to spend on all this stuff, let's see what it actually was at the end to see how we can all get better at our estimating. So this is where, as an individual, you should be tracking this for yourself. But then at the team level, we should also be checking to see how this is working out. User happiness, you can't really quantify this, but this is really important. I mean, if you're just releasing a lot of features and changes and your users don't like it, well, are you really doing the right thing? So, I mean, it's important to talk to your users and find out. Because if you don't listen to them, this is what happened to us. We were delivering all this stuff, but we weren't delivering the little picky tickets that take 1 hour to do that would like make their day way better. So they just quit telling us about problems, and they just kept finding workarounds, and they were all bitter. So when we actually listened to them and sat with them, like, oh, well, I mean, we can fix this real quick, and that makes a world of difference to them. So again, velocity is affected by all these different variables, but capacity is better. So what I do when I'm doing this, I start with a gut feel. I think we can do 60 hours this iteration. And also we do this, we break it up by the disciplines. So like 30 hours of dev and 20 hours of testing and all those different things. We're going to estimate all that stuff out and come up with a capacity estimate. I'm also going to estimate some of these other internal metrics myself of what I think they're going to be based on my 60-hour estimate. So I'm going to estimate, like I said, the work that comes into the iteration after the iteration starts. This could be bugs, it could be production support, it could be anything. I'm going to estimate, we already talked about we're going to figure out the percentage of time on each discipline. And again, account for any vacations and all that. And then when I get to the end of the iteration, let's say I thought we could do 60, and we actually did 50. So I can go look at the data. Well, okay, our estimates were good. We didn't have a lot of unexpected work come into the iteration, but my developers only spent 50% of their time coding when I thought it should be 60%. So that means the next iteration, I'm not going to estimate for 60 hours. I'm going to bump that down to 55 or whatever. So when you break it down into tracking all these smaller metrics, it's a lot easier to find what the problem is and then adjust your larger estimate. So this is where over time you can get really, 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 really good at this capacity estimate. So external metrics. This is things that you post and you share outside of your team. So things that you share with your management, or maybe you post on the wall. This is just really tricky, and I really don't like these. To me, the question is, what do people really want to know, and why do they want to know it? Usually they want to know some status of the project, but what I don't want is to just give them a Burndown chart and let them interpret it, because they may not interpret it correctly, and it may not give them the information they want. So I think a lot of times on projects, people want to know if it's generally going well or not. Maybe you've broken it down to different functional areas or different mini projects. What's the status of each mini project? Is it green, yellow, or red? As simple as that. What are some of the risks that we have? What are some of the blockers that we have? And then give your manager some ideas of, here's some things that you can do to help us, to get us some answers, or if we need this, if we can get this, we can do better, or we have this risk here because someone's not giving us an answer. That gives them something that they can do, and it gives them the status of the project. Anytime you post metrics, it can really distract the team from the goal. So if you post some kind of chart, people may try to just game the system. So the goal suddenly becomes, we need our velocity to be as high as we can get it. So, well, we don't have time for design meetings. I don't have time to go help this other team because they're about to fall into this big trap. I don't have time to, help my other team members with stuff. I don't have time to write tests. We just want to get our velocity chart to look good. Well, now I just directed the team in the wrong direction. So I think you need to have a really good reason for posting metrics. And sometimes your manager says, I want this. And you have to do it. But I like to try to, if I'm going to do that, I'm also going to sit with them and explain it to them as a conversation. There are bad metrics out there. Anything that compares team members, anything that encourages competition versus working together, this is all really, really bad, and it's going to get you in a bad spot. We're going to be most efficient when we work as a team together. Just like in team sports, basketball, a team that works together can beat a team of individuals. So we want to find ways to make the team more efficient, not individuals necessarily. There's also what I call implied metrics. This is really grainy because this was taken back before we had iPhones and stuff. But we have these columns of paper, and there's these green things represent tickets. And the size of the green paper is relative to how long the estimate is. And each of these columns is for a developer. So the goal is you'd put these dots on here to signify different statuses, and one of them is development is done, it's ready for testing. Well, the goal of the developers, some of the developers at least, became, let me see how many features I can get piled up on my sheet so that I look better than everybody else. Well, this certainly was not the intent of anybody who was on this, that was running this project or set up this system. But that's what happened. So again, this is an implied metric where anything that you post that can be interpreted by somebody will be interpreted by somebody. Oh, Burndown charts. How many of you do Burndown charts? Yeah. How many of you do them at an iteration level? How many of you do it at a project level? It's like multiple iterations. Okay. That's interesting. So there's a lot of you doing it at the iteration level. So these, again, are tricky because these can be just data without the interpretation. Let me just say there's no rules for how you do this. Think outside the box. There's all kinds of crazy things that I've done and seen done with Burndown charts. If you don't know what this is, we have a green line that shows the number of hours remaining, the ideal number of hours that should be remaining at some point, like a trend, and then the red line is where we actually are. So you should be able to get a sense of whether you're ahead or behind, which this is really valuable stuff to know, especially when you're earlier on in the project. If you can find out there's a problem sooner, that's great. This is one I did. This one looks crazy. So the red line is the ideal amount of time remaining. And it's very jagged. This is because initially we had one BA working on the project, and then he was going to get his stuff done, but developers weren't freeing up until iteration 51 here. Then we're going to have a bunch of developers and testers jump in and start cranking on stuff. Well, then we pushed the date back because we had some other stuff come up, so we had to push everything back by 3 weeks. If I just drew that straight line, it wouldn't be an accurate representation of where we thought we should be. So here we sort of estimated how much work we're going to do in each iteration, and then drew the lines based on that. And I also put notes on here and call-outs so I can show, okay, why did everything flatline for 3 iterations? Why did we get way behind there in the first third? So again, now I'm providing more interpretation of the data, and I'm trying to make it more accurate. This was from a project I was on. And so I'll tell you how this was interpreted. So you see this green line that's going down, and we're ahead of schedule. We're staying pretty consistent. We've estimated how much we think the scope is going to increase. that's this purple line that's going up. And I don't know if you can see the blue line because it's pretty much keeping in step of the amount of scope increase we thought we were going to have. So everything here is going just as we had planned. There's 2 people on this project, me and a BA/tester. I'm looking at this and I'm like, I am 20 hours ahead. If we get one bump in the road that delays the 2 of us for a day and a half, we're suddenly behind. Well, all the management people saw this and said, oh, hey, we're ahead of schedule. We're doing good. I'm looking at it like, oh, crap, there's a lot of risk here. So I tried multiple things to try to alleviate this. So you can't just extrapolate that red line straight down. There's really a range of where it's going to end up. So I started putting like an optimistic or a pessimistic trend on here based on some percentage variance. And you can see here we still have a pretty good shot of making it on time. But it's not a slam dunk. So it's not huge risk, but there is risk. Then we hit the bump in the road. Oh, crap. So it only put me 20 hours behind. But now I have very little chance of hitting the date on time based on the current situation. So, sorry. So again, this was a project where I did lots and lots of data analysis. So this was a data conversion. I had just done one just like it. And I tracked all the data in the world. And then I got to this one. So I had been saying 5 weeks out, this is like a 2.5-month project. I've been saying 5 weeks out from the release date that I think based on the way things worked on the last one, that this may not end well. And we may be behind. Well, when someone questions, well, why do you think that? If it's just your word against theirs, they're always going to pick theirs. But when I can back it up with actual data and say, okay, well, on this last project, we had a similar thing, and scope tended to increase by 8 hours every day because of unknown things that we kept discovering. So this is why I think we're going to be behind. It's very hard to argue with data because it's something that actually happened. It's not an opinion. It's not a guess. So should you post a Burndown chart? Like I was saying, try to find the questions that people really want and just tell them the answer. I'm going to say something else about these. There are no rules about what you do with this. I have no problem, and maybe some of you disagree with this. If you think that there's a risk and there's a problem, and you think that someone's going to take this data and interpret it, the goal is to get them to interpret it with the correct interpretation. If you want to adjust some of these numbers to make it look like you're behind, do it. Because, again, the data is not important. What's important is the interpretation of it. And if the people are going to make their own interpretation, then do what you have to do to get them to get the correct interpretation, which is actually the truth. So you may say, oh, well, I'm lying with the data. Well, you're telling the truth with what's important. So Burndowns still leave a lot of room for interpretation. So involving stakeholders. So it really helps to have a single product owner who is someone in the business who is responsible for setting the priorities of the project. If you have no product owners or you have multiple product owners, it's going to be difficult to get answers on priority. This is where you get stuck a lot waiting for answers or a lot of shifting priorities. You want to let the business pick what you work on. So in our approach, we like to, actually the business doesn't even meet with us anymore. They have their own meeting before the iteration starts, like several days before. They go through all the tickets that they have in the backlog, and they prioritize them. And they say, hey, these are the most important things. We want you to work on these. And then our BAs will pick them up and start working on them. Maybe they're already analyzed and estimated. But it helps initially to include the business people in, have some meeting with them where you have this ceremony where they get to choose what we work on in the next iteration. And usually I like to pick more than we think we have time for. Then we'll go do our capacity planning. We'll take their priorities and we'll figure out what we can work on, and then we'll go back to them and say, okay, this is what we're committed to this iteration. And now you have some extra stuff lined up that if you get done early, you can pick up the next thing. I like to set goals for the iteration. So we're going to complete this set of functionality, we're going to solve this issue, and we're going to do this. And then at the end, get them all in a room and do a demo of everything that you did. And if it's something bigger where you need some kind of user acceptance testing, fit that in there as well. This is where the 2-week cadence has worked really well for us because the business is used to doing these activities every 2 weeks. They know what to expect, and they like it. So everybody has a backlog of just stuff that needs to get done, especially if you're working on a maintenance project. This stuff just piles up over time, and eventually you have this massive mound of backlog because there's just a certain number of tickets in there that will never be high priority enough to actually get worked. So what do you do with those? Like, some people don't want to close them because it's like someone's just going to reopen it again. I say, like, pick some set amount of time. Like, if it's in 6 months this ticket's been created and nothing's happened, well, we should evaluate it, and we should probably either just get rid of it and close it, or maybe it got forgotten and we need to revisit it again and actually do it. I think the easiest thing to solve the problem is give the business the backlog. Let them own it, and they can do whatever they want with it, because they're going to be the ones that are figuring out the priorities anyway. So if they think something's not important, they can just close it. If they want to keep it around forever, that's fine. But it gives them ownership of it. So that's the important thing, is now they feel like they're a part of the process because this is their backlog. If they want to close a ticket, they can do that. They can prioritize however they want. They can set whatever fields they like to set and be OCD in the work item tracker, and they can do it their way. So working with management is always tricky because you're dealing with people. And if you're a developer, you need to start thinking like a manager. You need to think like a manager. You need to think like somebody who's in the business. You need to think about someone who actually has a stake in this, or maybe is actually spending their own money to do this project. And when you come out of school, you don't have any idea about any of that stuff typically. But even if you're just a developer on a team and you aren't talking with management, you want to know what their most important problems are. So I want to know what my manager, his manager, I want to know what their most important problems are right now because I want to be the one solving those. Or I don't want to be spending time on something that they don't think is important. So you want to understand what's important to them, and it can vary depending on the business, the person, the project. So sometimes getting to market really quickly or getting things out there really quickly is really important. Sometimes you gotta, the level of quality is more important. Sometimes security is more important. It just depends. So you ask them those questions, like, hey, they say, how long is this project going to take? Well, maybe I'll say, well, we can do it in 4 iterations. But if you kind of just want the quick and dirty thing where we just sort of copy how we did it in this other past thing we did, then we can do it in 3. So I'm giving them options and explaining the difference between the two. And maybe they sign up for the longer one, but now they know why it's 4 and not 3. And remember, estimate usually means commitment to them. So don't be surprised by that. And if you don't provide an estimate, one will be made up for you. So keep that in mind too. Because most managers came up through the working class of developers or testers or analysts or from the business, and they sort of think they have a sense of how long things take because they've done it before, but things change so much. Software gets more complicated, things take longer, so they may not know anymore like they used to, but they might think that they do. So you get to define what normal means for your team. Again, they want things to be done in a predictable fashion. So this is where I like to track all this data and figure how long everything takes. So once they start to understand how long things take and they can sort of get that sense of how long things take, they're going to feel good about it because now they can plan based on that and they can feel good about it. Another thing to remember is that when you're talking to them is that cost is not the only thing that matters. The ability to change quickly matters. I love this example. Let's say that you had a project that it had to be done in 30 days, and you had a $100,000 budget. So, and there's no value in getting it done early for the business. So they're not going to push the button to go to production until the 30 days is up. So let's say you have a team of internal developers, and they can do it in exactly 30 days, and it's going to cost $100,000. So that's one option. We can also hire this team of consultants over here, and these guys are really, really good. They can do the whole project in 1 day, but they have a high bill rate, so it's going to cost $100,000. So, the cost is the same, but think about it. If you pick the consultants that get it done in a day, then now you have more options. So you can get it done. You have 29 days to evaluate, like hey, I'm going to show this to the business. Let's see what they think. I don't have the risk of if they go over and it takes longer, I'm not going to miss my release date. Maybe they do it, and we say, the business says, this is all wrong. We got to do it all over again, and they decide they want to spend another $100,000 to get it right. They have all these options because now they have a chance to be able to change. The reason I bring this up is because a lot of times this is the argument that you have when you say you want to write automated tests. Businesses or the management says, we don't have time to write tests. Is this going to cost more? Is it going to slow us down? In the long run, it's going to make your ability to change. You're going to be able to change faster and change easier because you can make large refactorings of the code base and run a suite of tests and have a good sense of what you're doing. To me, that is the argument for automated tests and how you sell it to people. You can give them all these charts of how things are going to be done faster in the long run. Maybe that's true. They're probably going to think that it's not if they're already kind of not sold on the idea. But it's also the ability to change quickly. Because now the business can change their mind, change their course quickly. And in the business world, to be able to change quickly is a huge deal. Because if you don't change as quickly as everybody else, then now you might be losing out. So this is a very fast-paced job, I found. There's some analogies I like to use. It's like if you ever tried to ride the waves in the ocean. The wave comes along, and then you try to swim really fast to catch it. But if you start too late, everything just goes and passes. The wave just passes you by, and nothing happens. If you go too early, the wave picks you up and slams you into the ocean floor and churns you up and spits you out. But if you get it just right, it's an exhilarating ride. And I've been on all three of those things. So it's very much a learning experience. Or they also use the analogy with rookie quarterbacks in the NFL. They get to the NFL, and the game is just so much faster than it was in college. But then at some point in their development, they say everything slows down for them. I found that to be true too. You start to not get so overwhelmed by this flood of information and stuff changing so fast. So really, if I can say anything, if you're new to this, you're going to make mistakes. It's going to be a learning experience. Just try to keep everything in front of you. If you get this feeling like everything's just flying past you 100 miles an hour and you're not keeping up, you might need to take a step back and try to just spend a day and organize your thoughts, look at all the different things, and maybe come up with a plan of how you're going to address it. Maybe you don't have enough time to really focus on what you need to, so you need to delegate some responsibilities. That's a common thing that happens. So the one general rule, do more of what works and less of what doesn't. Figure out what this means for you. Try some stuff, and if it works, keep doing it. If it doesn't work, find a new way to do it. But always try to get better. All right, does anybody have any questions? That good, man. Oh, yeah.
Regarding your internal metric, you mentioned cycle time.
Mm-hmm.
Some suggestions on how will you measure or automate calculating cycle time? Because that is
Yeah, so it's tricky. So, I've tried different things. Some work item tools will record, timestamp when it moved from one state to another. You can do that. Or maybe it's just as simple as at the end of the day, you take a dump of all the work items and you see what state they're in. That's a low-tech way of doing it. But it depends on your work item tool and what work. I've done both. Yeah.
I was curious, what tools do you use for tracking, specifically?
I've used different ones. Right now we use TFS. It's all right. I don't like the work item tracking management that much, but it works. I've used Redmine. There's Pivotal Tracker. There's a million different ones out there. What does everybody use these days? Trello? Jira? What was that? Okay, yeah, so TFS in the cloud. Yeah, so there's lots of different ones. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just wondering if you have any guidelines on cycle time, because I get caught. I like to document things when they come up because it's I don't want to lose an idea, but then I get this backlog that looks like our cycle time is just terrible because we've got all this stuff that's not getting addressed. New stuff coming up
It really just depends. I don't know. I don't know if I can give you a good answer. Like I would just say, yeah. So the question was, cycle time's hard for him to track because sometimes he has to stop and document a lot of things, so it makes the cycle time look bad. And I think like it just depends on the situation. Like it's not an exact science. Like I just like to sometimes have these metrics just to kind of show me what I should look at. And sometimes I look at it and I say, oh, that's not a problem. But at least like it was a marker for me to look at it. Yeah?
You're talking about your estimation showing the project level charts. So are you doing all of your estimation for all of the stories right up front, or are you doing an actual?
The question was, so I showed the project-based estimations. Do I do all the estimates at the beginning of the project or as I go? And I've done both. So like if you need to give an estimate, it's for how much you need to give an estimate for. If you need to give an estimate for the whole project, then you might need to estimate it all. If you're just figuring out what to do in the next 2 weeks, then you probably don't need to estimate for more than 2 weeks. So it just yeah. So the estimation of the upfront feels kind of waterfallish, is what he said. And yeah, I mean, but I don't know another way to do it. I mean, you can try to find better ways of estimating, like maybe try story points if you don't know anything about what you're estimating. But I like to also say, though, that if it's like a 6-month estimate, that really has a lot of margin for error. So like I like to, it's hard to say, yes, it can be 6 to 8 months. Nobody likes to hear that. But at the same time, that's the truth. Like if you say 6 months, what's your percentage of confidence that you're actually going to meet it? Because if you say 6 to 8 months, a lot of managers want to say, okay, sweet, 6, it's done. You know, I'm telling everybody. But it's tricky. Any other questions? Yeah.
So in the estimation methods, you showed story points and time and no estimates. Is there ever a time where you do story points and you don't end up doing time though, really?
I've never done that, but I don't know. Can anybody else ever done story points and not translated it into time in the end? Did you try?
Well, for management, yes, but for the developers, no. Does that make sense?
What do you mean?
We kept hours away from the development side of things, but when we actually had management, like for management, they wanted everything in hours, so we had to kind of.
Yeah. So he didn't tell the developers the hours, but when he talked to management, he converted it to hours. So I mean, to me, the whole point of estimating is to get to hours. Like, otherwise, why are we estimating? Like, why do I need to know how long something takes if I don't want to know it in hours someday? Yeah?
Well, several projects we were on, we did story points, but the minute you put a Burndown chart on it, it becomes time-based anyway.
Yeah, so like, yeah, they start asking, well, what is 1 point in terms of hours?
So, one way or the other, you're either estimating complexity,
Yeah.
or the minute you map that to a time-based thing, you're essentially mapping to some sort of hours.
Right, but I think it still can be helpful to post the Burndown in story points because they don't know how to translate it to hours. I've posted Burndowns with no numbers on the y-axis, so they can just see that, oh, we're ahead or behind, but they can't look at it and say, oh, well, they're 40 hours behind, you know, and then make an interpretation off that. Well, that didn't work. I had to go put the hours on it, but I tried. So, I mean, try different stuff. See what works. All right, that's about it. If you have any other questions, just come on down. We can talk. Thanks for coming.